Hello, I'm Tracy Nicholas, and welcome to Folkloring. I am a passionate folklore practitioner, and to me, folkloring is more than just a podcast. It's my commitment to help you connect with your roots and awaken the wisdom within you. Hi, everybody, and welcome to this episode of Folkloring. And I'm here today with Tyler Brannan, and he is going to tell us a little bit about himself. But before we get to all of that, and before we talk about his involvement in folklore and his podcast and everything else about how folklore touches his life, first of all, welcome. Thank you for being here. And I wanted to ask you if you have been folkloring lately, and if so, how?
I sure have. I'm not going to say the name of it because it's technically unannounced, but so your audience will be the first to hear of this actually publicly. But I'm working on a new game project
Ooh,
that is very heavily based on, I guess you would call it American conspiracy theory. But
very cool.
so I had that, I'd mentioned it to you when you were on my show, I think, but I had had a conversation with a guy named Dr. Justin Sledge, who's a very popular on YouTube. He's got a Esoterica is his channel, and he's an occultist, esoteric historian, basically.
Mhm.
We were talking about UFO religion, and I'd never heard that term before. I probably saw it on a book on in Barnes and Noble or something like that, but I'm like, yeah, I never thought about it. But it is that really is like real folklore. People walking around talking about seeing flying saucers and and seeing Bigfoot and stuff like that. So I started really churning in my head about that. A lot of my guests, including yourself on the podcast, have been in the world of like legends and mythology. And then the next thing I know, I'm writing a new script. So yeah, that's the next project after I get a couple of things off my plate is it's just going to be all kinds of American conspiracy theories
Mhm.
as much as humanly possible. So yeah, that's been my obsession.
Is it like in addition to the UFOs, is it like cryptids or just like straight up conspiracy theories?
No, UFOs, cryptids, weather, geoengineering,
Hmm.
literally any witchcraft, anything that I can think of, and not necessarily portrayed in a negative light,
Hmm.
but very inspired by. If you've seen the series The X-Files,
Oh, of course.
the lone gunman,
Yeah.
the those three guys
Yeah.
were the inspiration for this game. So my friend Elijah Allen and I, we were just talking about like we'd really like to work together. We were looking at different art styles, and then one day he was like, "You ever seen The Lone Gunman?" I'm like, "Yes." He's like, "What if there was a game where you played like as one of those guys?" And
Okay.
I'm like, "That's genius."
Yeah.
Because there's a never-ending way to publish that. You could publish the game as a serial instead of it being, well, here's a game and you can get DLCs for it. It's like, why don't we just do it like seasonally? Like this is season one with 7 episodes and present it in the same way that they did the show. And you can have like a main overarching storyline, but you could also write it such that there's like monster or in our case mystery of the week kind of things. And that was the basis of getting into, I guess, strangely that world of folklore, although it is recent folklore.
I mean, I love cryptid lore, and
Mm,
I like that there are still stories being generated and shared in current
mm.
times because
Yeah,
we often think about folklore as like old stories, right? But that's not really true. I mean, we're creating new folklore all the time, and folklore that exists is changing and taking new directions. So I
right.
think that it's good to remember that we still are creatures that want to tell stories, that want to develop new stories. And I particularly love UFO stuff because when I think about the parallels back to sort of like fairy stories and how, those work the same way, you can sort of see how we've just sort of moved the same kinds of stories into a new technology, right? So I think that that's a lot of fun. Now, as for me personally, I have been doing my folkloring a little bit sort of less creatively, I guess, but it is spring when we're taping this, and it's right now the lilacs are in bloom. And so I love the scent of lilacs. Absolutely adore it.
Mm.
I had a huge lilac bush outside my bedroom window when I was growing up. And in my memory, it was like it would be weeks and weeks of that just amazing smell in my room. And of course, it's not. They only bloom for, a few days. But right now, I've been gathering them, and later today, I'm going to make some lilac syrup. And a couple weeks ago, I made dandelion syrup, which was really interesting. And of course, they're, sweet. You add them to beverages and stuff. But I think the lilac is going to be a little bit nicer than the dandelion. The dandelion was good, but it was a little bit earthy, and it was
Mm.
weird having like sweet with that earthy flavor. But that's how I've been folkloring lately. So,
Every time I hear the word lilac, this might be news to you, but so the lilacs are huge in video game lore for the specific reason that in The Witcher number 3, Geralt of Rivia is the main character, and he's searching for this girl. And the only description that it gives at the beginning of the game is that she smells like lilac and gooseberries. And everybody who plays games knows this. Even if they don't know anything about herbs or anything about folklore in general, it's like, oh well, that's what she smells like. So then the rest of the game is hunting down this girl.
wow, that's wild. I
Yeah.
had no idea. I've never,
Yeah.
like, I'm not into that kind of gaming. I do mostly like RPGs.
It is an RPG. The
Oh,
Witcher is a an action RPG for sure. But you play as a character, you level up the entire time,
oh,
and you're constantly you're traveling around this world. You're doing sword fighting and casting spells and doing alchemy, but you're hunting down various monsters. It's actually that video game has one of the most complete grimoire of world monsters, whether that be ghosts, cryptids, vampires, you name it.
hmm.
It's all in there. It's extensive and it's
Wow.
amazing.
I'm gonna have to check it out.
Mm.
I really liked the show based,
Ah, yeah. Okay. So you did see the Netflix series, right?
yeah, yeah.
Mm.
And that I enjoyed that a lot. And I love games in which I can do spell crafting and different kinds of witchcraft. So those, to me, that's the most fun because it's so random and you can just decide you're gonna do some crazy spell and the entire story takes a left turn and it's just like, what just happened, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I love what we would call an immersive sim,
Hmm.
where it's so there's a game called Kingdom Come Deliverance that is it's a role-playing game, but it's also extremely grounded in reality in
Hmm.
terms of like there's no dragons or fantasy magic or anything like that.
Hmm.
It takes place in like I'm gonna say 1500s Bohemia, like Holy Roman Empire kind of time frame.
Okay.
And you do really accurate herbalistic alchemy in that game. Like you have to walk up to the station, you have to collect the herbs, you have to take them out, put them in bags, and then like, okay, this and boil it for one turn and then add the spirit, all that stuff. It's all there. And for whatever reason, I spent hours in that game just mixing different things. I'm like, man, I could be doing this in my garden right now. I have all the I have all the same ingredients. But
Oh, did you ever do it in real life?
no, I mean, I cook. Don't get me wrong, I use herbs to make things, but I've never like messed around with trying to figure out what the Philosopher's Stone is or anything like that.
Got it. What's your
Yeah.
favorite herb?
For cooking, that's a hard choice. I'm gonna go with cilantro because the Mrs. loves it so much,
Hmm. Hmm.
which I know is a controversial herb, but it is delicious in my
But
taste.
that's a genetic thing, right? And
Yeah.
I love it. I crave cilantro. It's just like one of my favorite flavors in the whole world. And I
Mm.
can't even imagine what people who think it tastes like soap, like it just confounds me. Like
Mm.
I will, if I'm using it, I will just sit there and smell it and just enjoy like while I'm cutting it up, how the aroma of it.
Oh yeah.
And I think my favorite thing to make with cilantro, although it's a hard call because I love pico de gallo, but
Mm.
there's a dip that I make and it has yogurt. It's a yogurt based and it's got pomegranate and green onion and cilantro. And I know
Oh
it
yeah.
sounds crazy, but it is amazing when you mix it up, have it with some corn chips, and it's just such an unusual combination of flavors. So yeah, that's I definitely agree with you on the cilantro.
Yeah, I've been doing some experimentation with like fusion food, and one of the things that I came up with recently was that I started making these bulgogi tacos, which is amazing, like corn tortilla bulgogi, and like I'll experiment with the vegetables too. So I'll throw in some like squash or zucchini or something in there in the marinade,
Mhm.
and then throw fresh cilantro on top of that thing. It'll blow your mind, I promise. Just don't burn your tongue because I'm just recovering from a lip injury. They were so good.
Wow. When you injure yourself because something's
Yes.
so
Oh
good.
my, I just can't stop eating it even though I'm bleeding. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, let's practice safe eating from now on.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about you. I want to hear about all of the different things you're involved in. And,
Mhm.
well, I know, so I don't need to hear about it, but I want my listeners to hear about it.
Sure, I'll try to do the quick rundown. So, I'm a U.S. Air Force veteran, and while I was serving, I started my own business because I said, you know what, I'd like to do that. I was obsessed with this video game called Quake. Um, I'm sure some of your, at least older listeners, are familiar with it too. It's a first-person shooter game. It's very set in like a sort of fantasy sci-fi world,
Mhm.
and it's kind of known for being like the father of modern multiplayer games.
Okay.
So I started a podcast about that, and then I realized pretty quickly like I'm going to run out of stuff. And then that led to, okay, I'm going to talk about retro first person shooters in general. And then that led to, I'm going to talk about indie games in general. And then that led to, I could really talk to anybody about anything I want. And then, fast forward 5 years later, I'm having, folkloring people on my podcast, and I'm having, physicists on the show, and historians, and occult, researchers, and UFO witnesses, and all kinds of things. Just, it just grew over time.
Mhm.
So In the Keep podcast is like kind of my main passion, aside from our video game sector. So in addition to, like, we provide a lot of services for different clients, whether that be graphics or websites or whatever, and that's how we pay the bills. But we are taking all that money basically and putting it back into designing our own games.
Mhm.
When I got out of the Air Force, I went to work for a company called 3D Realms.
Mhm.
They're a huge video game company. I was at first a producer, then I went over to their marketing department, and I was doing like brand management. You did like product management, basically, like overarching, you know, not just managing one game, but managing lots of games and putting them on the market, doing that kind of thing.
Mhm.
And that taught me a lot about the business. So after the kind of economic crash of the entertainment world post COVID, I
Mhm.
ended up moving back to America. And I've just ever since then been full time working for my own company, which I recommend to anyone who has the ability to do so. I love work, like running a company. That is so much fun, as stressful as it can be.
Mhm.
Every day you wake up and it's a new challenge, but yeah, having the freedom to do what you want with your money and have a group of people who are kind of, I'm not going to say dependent because it sounds like you look down on them, but they're your team,
Right.
and they're your responsibility, and you have to come up with solutions for them all the time.
Mhm.
That's one of the things that I did learn, very much so in the military. People use the word sergeant, don't realize what it means. It literally means servant.
Mm.
And, because you're serving, not only are you a servant to your officers, but you're also a servant to your subordinates. And they come to you with problems, and your job is to solve them so that the guy up the chain doesn't have to solve it.
Right.
And in this case, I'm the guy up the chain. So I always just look at everything like, okay, how can I make your life better?
Sure.
How can I find a solution that makes your life better without making my life intolerable? So,
Yeah, I mean, I've been out of the corporate
mm,
world for 9 years now and working for myself. And I find that I work a lot more than I used to,
mm,
but I enjoy it a lot more. So it's definitely something that I think everybody should at least try at some point in their life if they're able to, because you learn in so many different ways.
mm.
And I like the freedom. Like here we are, middle of the week, middle of the day, and we're able to jump on and have conversations about folklore because I know I can do my business stuff later when I want to.
Yeah, it's a lifestyle choice for sure, and it frees you up a lot. Like if I just decide Monday morning at 9 a.m., like I don't have anything I have to do right now, so I'm not getting up.
Yeah,
Or I want to spend the day with my wife and son, so I'm not gonna do that thing that how important is it really?
right,
And you don't really get that choice if you work for someone else all the time. It's like they're counting your hours or whatever. I'm like, no one's counting my hours.
right.
I'm paid by basically whatever we generate and what
Yeah.
I can afford to pay myself at the end of paying everyone else. um, which is nice.
Yeah,
Which is it really makes you. It also makes you appreciate if you do go back to working for someone else, or if you're contracting for people or whatever it is. It makes you appreciate what they're going through too. Because I think we have this narrative in our mind that CEOs are all like the stereotype of the guy with the Lamborghini and everyone else is getting underpaid and all that kind of stuff. And I don't operate that way, but
mhm,
I also like appreciate now like the trials of a small business owner and what they go through
right,
and making payroll because you don't want to ruin someone else's Christmas, but maybe you're gonna sacrifice a little here and there for yourself,
right.
and that's okay. That's the risk that you take.
It also makes me appreciate, like, I think about all those people out there who do have a job and then they are still creating. They're
Mm,
creating in, the evenings and the weekends. And they're like, obviously, I know a lot of people who have folklore podcasts
mm.
and they're hustling, right? And I appreciate the fact that they go and put in a full day of work and then still say, I'm going to slice out some of my free time and not just, hang around and watch Netflix, but I'm going to create something that is going to add value to other people's lives. So I really
Oh yeah.
appreciate those people.
For the first several years that I was doing this podcast and running this business, I was also doing 12-hour shifts working in a weather department for the United States Air Force. So like I really appreciate free time. But I didn't know how to use free time. I didn't know what the word free time meant for a long time. People would be like, "What are your hobbies?" I'm like, "I don't have any hobbies." When I'm done working, I go work more until I pass out, and then I wake up 4 hours later and come here. And you're like, "Man." And and a lot of people don't necessarily do that. They have like a real work-life balance, and I think that's great. I think that's important.
Mhm.
But my early 20s, that was not a thing. I just hustled all the time
Yeah.
because I knew I don't want to be trapped in this lifestyle. Like I don't want to do this forever. So I need to set myself up for my future. I knew people who were doing that, but they were doing it with school, maybe.
Mhm.
I was one of the only people I knew who like started a business while they were in the service. There are other people who do it, but like to really go for it and then have yourself set up for success by the time your contract is over, that's a commitment. And a
Mhm.
lot of people panic at the last minute. They're like, no, I want stability. And at the time, I didn't have anything to be stable for. So I was like, screw, I'm just going to throw the dice on the table and see what happens.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when I was in grad school, everyone who was in my particular program, and it was a very small cohort. I think there were less than 10 of us when I first started.
Mm,
Now the program's much bigger, but oh my God, we almost like everybody at that time worked full time and then they were going to school. So all the classes were in the evenings and
right.
stuff like that. But we were so pretentious because we'd be like, oh, like someone tell you what their job was. You'd be like, oh, so what's your third thing? Like, you've got full-time
Mm,
work, you've got school, but surely
yeah.
do something else. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, it was. I remember my third thing was that I was on the board of directors for a local dance company,
Oh, yeah.
and but like you had to have a third thing, or people would be like, huh, you know. But then as my sort of spiritual practice grew, I realized that there's a lot of value to both obviously being out in nature and how that affects our bodies, how it affects our spirit and our mental health, and also just having time to do things like meditate. It's like you don't always have to be go, go, go. You need that rest. And so for me, that's really sort of part of my spiritual life.
When did you learn to meditate?
It was, believe it or not, it was in lockdown. And because
That's late in life. Yeah.
yeah, I never could do it before that. And it was always like my mind would always be racing, and I couldn't sort of calm my mind down for more than 5 minutes. And then through the recommendation of a friend, I got some different, they're called binaural beats.
Yep.
Yeah. And that, like, once I discovered those and started listening to those while I was meditating, I was able to calm my mind down and basically focus myself through that. So that helped me a lot. And I just get them on YouTube. I just have a bunch of them saved. It didn't used to be that there would be commercials in the middle, and every once in a while there is, not on all of the ones I have, and that's very jarring. It also helped me. I'm one of those people who historically, you know how some people are like, oh, when you visualize, like you close your eyes and you see things, right? Like in your mind. I was one of those people that I never actually saw anything. I could imagine things, I could, think about things, but I wouldn't actually see any images. And I was actually quite shocked to find out that other people did. I was like, wait a minute. Like you visualize things and you see pictures in your brain. And so I started working on that and through sort of regular meditation. And I like the longest I ever go is an hour. Usually it's more like 30 minutes, 30, 40 minutes.
Mm.
But I've worked on being able to see those images, and I don't see them for like really long. If like they'll come up and I'll see them, but then if in my mind's eye I like quote unquote look at them, they'll disappear. Like I just have to let them exist. I can't focus on them. So I've been working on that, getting better.
Yeah. I think I learned to meditate from do you remember that app? It may still be around. It's called Headspace.
Hmm.
This was probably 2015. I was a very stressed out person. Like I've always been a really stressed out person, like really, really high anxiety since I was a little kid. I mean, I had a whole lot going on in my life and everything. And then I was, when I was like 18, 19, I was basically just doing like hard labor in my job. So I never learned to just calm down other than through physical activity, like whether that be working hard. I was a wrestler, so I did that a lot, like martial arts, all that stuff. That was like kind of my way of coping.
Mhm.
And then I don't remember. It's probably some podcast I was listening to, probably like Joe Rogan or something like that. We are talking about like, oh, meditation's like really good for you. I'm like, I'll try anything. And I was just about to ship off to the Air Force, so I spent like 6 months just zenned out completely. Like just I first learned from that app, and I was like sitting out by my grandmother had a swimming pool, so I would sit, in my meditation posture at the end of the diving board every day and like just go
Oh,
deep. And I got really, really into it. And even I carried that practice with me. And there have been times in my life where I lose it and I realize like, man, when is the last time I did that?
yeah.
And it's like it's crazy how fast it goes away. But you get to a point where you live in that headspace and you're pretty calm all the time. You can kind of manage your thoughts. So like for me, the biggest there are lots of revelations, don't get me wrong, but like the biggest one at first was that this is not about focusing on my breathing and it's not about not thinking. It's about being in control of your thoughts. So like the the metaphor that always gets used is like imagine you're sitting on the edge of a highway and there's cars going by and your thoughts are these cars. You
Mhm.
can't follow every car.
Right.
You'll get overwhelmed. You'll get ran over. Just let them pass.
Yeah.
And then, you see something that's really interesting, focus on that one thing and follow that thought all the way through. I think this is the cure to ADHD, by the way.
Interesting.
I don't think I'm not here to be your doctor or anything, but like Adderall and all that stuff ain't work for me. Like it'll make you focus, but it doesn't solve your problem.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So for me, that was like it's probably the reason why I was able to go those long shifts and stuff like that, and then still come home and still work the way I was. And ultimately, that led me to then later in life having sleep problems, which I also solved with meditation, because I would do the whole turn your body off at the end of the day, tell your toes to go to sleep, all
Yeah.
that stuff. It's been one of the best practices I think that I've ever picked up for my health, for my mental health, for physical health. I mean, just lowering your stress levels and having control of your own, not just your mind, but your body. Because
Mhm.
if you can control your breath, you can control anything.
Yeah.
Even if you're lifting heavy weights, like being in control of your breath. If you're running, I'm not the fastest runner in the world, but I'm pretty sure I could book it for a long time just simply on being totally in control of your breath.
Mhm.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, I like walking. I'm not a big fan of running. I do lift as well, but it's again, what right now I'm studying the Kabbalah, and
Let's talk about the Kabbalah.
okay. It's fascinating stuff. I do a couple of different practices.
Mm.
I'm taking a class, and so it's sort of, a guided walk through. And it's been like part of one of the practices. I've got any number of things to read. It's crazy how much reading I'm doing, but it's also a number of practices that I have to do every day. And
Mm.
a lot of those involve measured breathing and like breathe in for 4 and then breathe out for 8 and all of that kind of thing to sort of
Mm.
like work on that breath control.
Yeah. No-
So your thoughts on the Kabbalah? Let's,
Oh my God, I could go on forever. It's the most fascinating thing. For whatever reason, just I was in a meeting recently. I basically I'm like in this class every Monday night or whatever where we talk about all these different esoteric things, like whether it be astrology or if it be astral plane travel, sometimes like Kabbalah, Hermetic philosophy. It's just like basically a philosophy group.
Mhm.
And one day they were sitting there, they're talking about astrology and they're trying to make it make sense to the skeptic, because there's a lot of people in the class who are like, this is nonsense. Oh my gosh, everybody knows that horoscopes are just basically personality test. Oh my gosh. And I'm like, I I'm trying to help the teacher break this down. I'm like, we should have done Kabbalah first. If we done Kabbalah first, all of this would make sense to you.
Mhm.
Like, so learning something as simple as how the tree of life maps on to all world mythologies, like,
Right.
and I mean every one of them without fail,
Yep.
really makes it all make, for me it makes sense. So like if you take the Sephiroth laid out on the tree of life and just replace them with the Roman gods, why not? Now you got the planets, now you got astrology.
Right.
So now you like omitting your sun signs, because I think people get way too focused in on their sun signs.
Mhm.
When someone says something like you're reading an old book and it says like, oh, I felt like I had this great tragedy in my late 20s, and I felt like Saturn was reaching out to shake my hand and crushing me. And I'm like, yeah, because freaking Saturn goes around the solar system every 27 years and you're having your spiritual awakening. Saturn is the god of spiritual wisdom. That's why you're having this moment, this crisis in your life. It's going to happen again in your 50s, and that blew my freaking mind. I'm like, there has to be more to this than I thought. Then I started studying tarot and, the major arcana
Mhm.
being based on the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. So, of course, then I go out and I buy a freaking textbook about Hebrew. I'm like, okay, let's start learning some more. And then that got me deeper into the Kabbalah. I'm like, okay, so all of these pathways are assigned to one of these letters, and they all have a meaning that's not just a letter in a word, but also a deeper numeric meaning. And then I started thinking about the, dimensions of the universe that we live in. As you live, as you go through life, as you go through your tree of life, of course, you visit all these different paths, you go different routes. People have different ways of doing it. But I mean, you're ultimately going from, your kingdom to, and I'm going to use the Roman word Neptune. You're getting to the Trinity, the crown at the top,
Mhm.
ideally. And all of that has, at least metaphorically, at least as a way of understanding it, whether you're a spiritual person or not. Go look at Carl Jung's work on this kind of stuff,
Mhm.
and it all makes sense. It just makes life so much more understandable if you have a simple, basic understanding of Kabbalic structure.
Right.
At
Right.
least for me.
Yeah, I think that that's one of the great things about folklore, and I've said this before, and I'll say it again, is that it doesn't matter if it's true or not, right?
Mm,
It can be just metaphorical. It can be that the real key is what do people believe and why do they believe it? And
sure.
that's to me, that's the essence of folklore and why it's important. And so I like thinking about, does it matter if your tarot spread is real or not? Or it's like it's a back door into your subconscious. And what matters is how you interpret it, right? Because
Sure.
it's helping you figure out, they say that if you're making a decision and you're like sort of caught between, two different things that you can choose to do, and you flip a coin, you think about what you hope side is up in the moment before you actually reveal what side is up, and that's the thing you really want. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, and I
I
think
don't,
that's true with all oracle kind of stuff. Anything, and we've talked about this before, anything can be an oracle, right?
there's a balance between like having your own personal control over things, free will,
Mhm.
and then like kind of accepting that some decisions are left to a higher power, even if that higher power for you is a coin flip.
Right.
Or if, like what's the Carrie Underwood song, like, Jesus Take the Wheel. Like
Yeah.
I don't recommend necessarily letting go of the steering wheel of your car, but I just mean like just accepting, that's a meditation practice. Just accepting that this is out of my hands. What's the old serenity prayer? It's like give me the serenity to accept the things that I cannot change,
Yeah. Yeah.
and just being okay with that. Like, you know what? I can't decide. Obviously, this is bigger than me.
Right.
Flip a coin, see what happens. Maybe you do wish it had went a certain way, but if you just accept that that decision's already been made, you don't have to worry about it anymore. And most of the time, the stress is not about the decision; it's about having to make the decision.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing too. It's a lot of it is our interpretation of events, and that's the difference between living a good life and having an unhappy life,
Yeah.
right? Because if you're able to let go, like bad negative things are going to happen, right? That's just the way that life is. But
Mm.
it comes down to how you interpret it and how you are going to see it overall in sort of the bigger picture of your life. And I think that that's one of the reasons that we do tell stories. We tell stories in order to help us learn lessons, and I think that it's really interesting when we do learn a lesson from a story. A lot of times
Mhm.
we'll internalize that lesson, but then at a certain point, it just becomes a belief of ours, and we forget that it came from a story. And so, that's why kind of morality tales are effective. That's why, we do learn from our stories. And that's why there are so many stories telling us about how to be a good person, live a good life. Don't be greedy, don't be envious, don't, and so I think that that's one of the reasons that our stories matter to us and why we see similar kinds of folklore and myths from around the world, because those are the things that matter to people as individuals and as a species.
The I'll always try to tie things back into video games for some reason, but John Carmack was the creator of the game Doom. He was the programmer of the engine for Doom and Quake and lots of other things. If you're a computer person, he's like the god of computing. Modern day computing is all based on stuff that he did. At least in the world of games and simulation, and now AI and lots of other stuff. But he had this famous line that gets quoted all the time, where he said that in a video game, the story is as important as the story in a porno movie because it's expected to be there, but it's not really important to the end result, right?
Interesting.
And that's pretty wise because when you know this from your own game design. The story is important. It needs to be there. You're trying to tell a story, but what you really need is for the person to get through the experience. And so that's how we make sense of things that we experience in our life. While it's happening, it feels like a bunch of random events. It feels like a bunch of chance things where you flipping a coin or whatever. And then at the end of it, when you tell the story, you're like, oh, well, it was a series of events that all led up to this.
Mhm.
So I mean, I could tell an entire story about like, and then I did this, and it would sound like a bunch of random events, and at the end I can cap it off with it. And now happily married, and I have a beautiful baby boy and all that stuff.
Right.
Yeah, and now it makes sense. It's like I did all of that so I could get to this point. All of those experiences, all of those trials and things taught me to meditate. It taught me to be a business owner. It taught me to be a father. It taught me, and then later in life when I'm a grandpa, what does every grandpa do but sit around and tell old stories about their life, you know? And you're imparting wisdom through your own experience onto someone else. If you just tell them like on Tuesday I did this, no one gives a shit.
Right.
Sorry. But if you tell them the story of how it all ties together, that's wisdom. Oh, Grandpa, he's crazy, but he's wise. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that I love talking about people's like personal and familial folklore.
Mm,
And like think about, the stories. When I was growing up, I have an older brother, and when my mom was pregnant with him, he was very active, right? And when my mom was pregnant with me, I was not very active. And my mom started to like freak out, and she kept going back to the doctor because she thought that like something had happened to me and that like I was going to be stillborn. And the doctor kept saying, no, no, she's fine. She's fine. It's all fine. And then
mm.
some years later, when my mom was teaching my brother to read, and I'm a huge reader. I love reading. So I learned how to read at the same time my brother, who's 2 years older than me, learned how, right? And then it sort of started to become this family myth, right? That it was like, oh, well, the reason that Tracy was so still when mom was pregnant is she was in there reading a book. And it got to be like this family joke. And so I love personal lore like that because it's, again, it's a smaller group of people sharing the stories, but I could tell that story to my nieces and nephew, and my brother would know exactly where it was going. And those are the kind of stories I do love. And I love stories in general when people are like recalling something and telling about what has happened because memory is so slippery. We think like, oh, we can remember exactly what happened, but our memories, like when we remember something, we don't remember the event, like the initial event. What we
Correct.
remember is the last time we remembered it.
Yep.
And so things can sort of change over time when other things can get incorporated, right? I'm telling you the story of me, being in there reading a book, right? And a car horn honks, and,
Mm.
driving by. And then like somehow that might get incorporated into the memory of my family telling that story.
I love the metaphor of like the fishing story, right? So everybody's grandpa has the massive gigantic fish that they pulled out of some lake somewhere, right? Like that's everyone has that. And it's like there's three parties to that story. It's not like there's not two sides of the truth and then the real truth. It's like, okay, this is a true story. Grandpa really did pull a big fish out of the lake. And every time he tells the story, Uncle Jack knows for sure that the fish got bigger every time he told the story. Like a little bit bigger every single time.
Right, right.
The story's still a true story. And that's how myths happen, or at least that's how I posit that they would happen. It's like, okay, Samson was a big, strong dude, and he had long hair. And then our collective memory over time is like, all right, he was enormous. He was like the Incredible Hulk, and
Yeah.
he could pull down temple walls with his arms. And if you give a fishing story 2,000 years, it's Moby Dick. Um,
I would like to say, as a Midwestern girl, I have been fishing on many occasions, and the biggest fish that I ever caught was like this, just like tiny little like rainbow trout.
trout.
Yeah. And I'm holding it up. I think it might actually have been the only fish I ever caught. And, I wasn't like going fishing because I was so excited to do it. It was always, some dude that I was dating that wanted to go fishing. But yes, I'm like proudly holding up this tiny little fish that's like 6 inches, maybe. And yeah, so I do not have that fishing story where the fish gets bigger and bigger.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think somebody in your family does. Somebody caught a fish one time that was the same size as your. See, what you've done, what you failed at with your own personal folklore, is that you by now, all these years later, that fish should have been a whopper.
Yeah.
It should have been enormous, like mounted on like oh, you wouldn't believe how big this fish was. Like it was crazy huge. And it's the only fish I ever caught. The only time I ever put a line in the water. pull that sucker out. It was, but maybe, perhaps the fish wasn't as small as you remember it, and you're still shrinking it in your mind. Maybe you're diminishing your own personal lore.
Well, see, now here's the problem with all of that is
Photographic evidence.
I have the photographic evidence. So,
Yeah,
but yeah, I could if I got rid of that, man, that
yeah,
fish could grow and grow.
yeah. You could psychoanalyze somebody on how they exaggerate their fish. Like
Yeah.
maybe.
And I don't know that you can really trust someone that's never gone fishing.
Mm. It's weird. I don't wouldn't say that I don't trust them because I hope they have some equivalent in their world that's just, I grew up in the desert, but maybe
Okay.
for them it was coyote hunting or I don't know. But um
People go coyote.
city people make me nervous. You're from Chicago. You people like yeah, like just the disconnect from nature. But then when I'm in a city, I feel like I'm in the jungle. Like I can navigate in the forest. I
Mhm.
grew up like that. Like I can just like, oh, well, there's the moon, there's the North Star. Okay, I'm home 20 minutes later. And then if I'm in the city, I get so confused. And there's signs, it's all there. Like they make it so easy for you. And I'm like, I'm so confused. I'm overwhelmed. It's too much noise, too much input here. So
Yeah, I mean,
I,
Chicago's very easy for me to navigate. Obviously, I've lived in this area
mm,
my whole life. But now I live directly across the street from an arboretum. So I have like nature
mm.
that's just walking across the street.
Is an arboretum really nature though? Like,
It's not super like cultivated. I mean,
okay.
it
Yeah.
overlooks the canal, and
Sure.
so everything and there's a fence there because they don't want people to drown.
Mm,
But like everything beyond the fence is really wild, and there are a bunch of coyotes that live there. And this is a very weird time of year because when they're out there like hunting and or mating, coyotes make this otherworldly noise, especially when
right.
they like caught something and they're
Yeah.
it's freaky. And I like to have my windows open. And so hearing the shrieks of the coyote at 3 in the morning, it's like you still get that sense of nature is wild, nature is dangerous.
Sure.
And telling those stories about, not going into the woods and stuff. Like if I was at a place where I wasn't inside my house and feeling relatively safe and knowing that there are coyotes that live there, like it would totally freak me out.
I I've got a family folklore coyote story for you.
Okay.
This is one of those that I'm going to tell my grandkids one day, and I'm looking forward to it. So one night, me and my at the time girlfriend,
Mhm.
we were hanging out, and she was like really stressed. I'm like, hey, let's go out. It's middle of the night. We can go stargazing. That'd be romantic, right? Grab a quilt, we'll go out. We're not too far from a national park. This is in Tucson, Arizona, so it's like the desert. So we drive out to this national park that's open. We didn't trespass because the gate was open, I promise.
Okay.
So we're driving up there. We get up on the mountainside. Yeah, we lay out the quilt or whatever, and I'm like, man, this would be a great time to propose. Uh, I need a sign. I'm like, yo, Big G, give me a sign, right? And then there's a shooting star,
Oh my God.
and I'm like, that's pretty good. But I was still nervous. So then another one comes by, and it's another shooting star. I'm like, starting to feel like there's a pattern here.
Right.
So I've got my hand in my pocket and I got the ring and everything. And then the third shooting star comes up, like, that's it. I'm doing it. And I'm like, oh my, will you be all that stuff?
Right.
So she's over the moon excited. She's, oh my God, this is so amazing. I gotta call my sister. I'm like, relax. The thing is, I'm very in touch with the whole nature is dangerous thing. I grew up in Nowheresville, Alabama.
Right.
She grew up in Dixon, Illinois, so kind of like it's still not the city, but not dealing with wild animals and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So then there's like she's so excited. There's a pack of coyotes yipping in the distance, and then she hears them and she goes, "Arr!" like really loud. And I like immediately my eyes glazed over. I'm like,
God.
"What are you doing?" And she's like, "I'm just being silly." And she like, "Arr!" I'm like, "Stop! Are you effing insane?" And then you can hear them running, and we're probably 100 yards away from our car on a trail. So you can hear the coyotes. They're curious now, and they're running towards us, and they're yipping louder and louder and louder. And I'm like, pulled her up by her arm, made sure she still had the ring, uh, grab the quilt, and we book it back to the car, get in and drive out of the place. And then on our way home, we're crossing. Basically, you're coming out of the park. There's a street between where the park's exit is and like the next neighborhood where we're going. And sure enough, the coyotes are in the street. And so we zip past them. And I'm like, never do that again. By the way, thanks for saying yes.
Oh my God, that must have been terrifying.
It was awesome. I mean, I was scared. I really respect the fact that coyotes will eat you, butthole first if they get a hold of you. Like they're vicious animals, and people think like, oh, it's a cute doggy. I'm like, no, not out here. Maybe in your neighborhood where you can like shoot them if you have to or close the door. But we're in their house right now.
I would definitely not mess with a wild coyote. And I used to have three dogs, and they were
Mm,
decent sized. And
mm.
the one never really got to be good.
The story started off with, I used to have three dogs, just so we're clear.
Yes, yes,
Okay.
they passed away.
Ah, I thought you were going to tell me they got ate by the
Oh
coyotes.
God, no.
Oh
But
my
so the
God.
one was never good on the leash.
Mm,
And so I would take him out by himself, right? Because like doing it, because they were, I mean, like all together it was probably 225 pounds of poodle, right? So they were
mm,
big dogs. But Riley was pretty little, and I took him out by himself. And so what I'd do is I'd go down to the next street, I'd cut across to the park on the other side of the canal, walk through the park, and then come back through the arboretum on this side of the canal, and then,
mm.
cross the street back home. And so there was one time where I was taking Riley in the like at dusk, really, and man, a pack of coyotes started following us.
Yep.
And I was like, yeah, time to like get back on the street, on the sidewalk, and get the hell back home.
Yeah,
But I have, in fact, petted a coyote.
sure.
So there is a forest preserve nearby that rescues animals that can't survive out in nature, right? They
They
have
rescued a coyote?
They rescued a coyote. Yeah. They've got one, there's
Okay.
an eagle that had its wing shot that can't fly. There's a couple of
Oh,
owls with other various injuries and stuff. The coyote, a woman had taken the coyote and raised it from a pup. And
amazing.
yeah, and so it didn't have any instincts
Mm,
to go hunt and everything. And so when she finally, like when the coyote started getting big and she was like, I can't handle this anymore. She turned it over to the forest preserve, and they had him in a cage. And I knew one of the people that worked there and happened to go with him on, it was Christmas Day, and helped him to, feed the animals because obviously you have to still take care of them when it's a holiday and nobody in the place is closed. But he was feeding some other animal, and the coyote came and like pressed up against the side of the cage, and I was standing right there, and so I started petting him, and it was amazing. Like I love when I get a chance to do things like that. I've petted a tiger, I've petted a cheetah. That's always like good fun for me to do that. I've petted a skunk. And fun fact, baby skunks do not get, they can't like,
spray you?
yeah, they can't
Yeah.
spray you until they're like a year old. So
I'm not petting any of those animals ever. Sure.
no, it's good fun. And again, it's like those are sort of my stories. And I've got a story about petting the cheetah. You're supposed to approach it from behind because that's what it was trained to do, right? And then it rolled over and it started curling its paws around me, and I was like,
Mm-mm.
oh my God, right?
I don't trust them.
Yeah,
No way. Maybe the baby like raised by humans from the jump coyote I could do, but
yeah. No, I mean
big cats, no sir. No ma'am.
it was a juvenile. It wasn't like a baby.
Mm,
It was a juvenile. The tiger was a baby. It was like
Mm.
tiny. But yeah, it was like, so what happened? It rolled over and started curling its paws around. And they're like, okay, that's fine. What you need to do is just stand up and don't turn around, just back away. And I was like, okay. So I stand up and I take a step back and boom, I'm up against the fence. And they're like, okay, well, you're going to have to step over his paws. And I was like, okay. So, I'm, maintaining my calm. I'm freaking out, but maintaining my calm. And so I step over and they're like, wait. And I was like, thanks a lot. It was in a preserve and I was there to, I was donating to them. And that's how I got to go in with the cheetahs. And
Mm.
so they're like, wait. And because I was like, okay, like that was freaky. I'm out of here, right? And they pull me back down behind now again behind the cheetah and put my hand on the cheetah's like belly. And I look and my whole hand is shaking. And I'm like, what the, right? And I realized he was purring. Like as I was petting him, he was purring. And so I was like, okay, that's got to be one of the cooler things that has ever happened to me in my life. And then I got up and I was like, okay, great. And I go to leave the enclosure and the cheetah takes off into like the greater reserve area. And so everybody else that I was on this tour with to this cheetah reserve did not get to pet the cheetah. And so I got so many dirty looks the bus ride back. So, but it was
Yeah.
cool. It was
You're
cool.
much braver than I am because I ain't I ain't messing with no cheetahs. It's not happening. So I had this crew of artists that I was working with at the video game company. This is in Aalborg, Denmark.
Mhm.
And we had this guest speaker that I had booked to kind of fly in and give a presentation to all the artists. And she was a professional creature designer. Her name's Molly Hetty Carroll.
Mhm.
Really, really brilliant. She's worked for Netflix and all kinds of different, film or game companies, teaching them how to like if you're going to design a monster or a creature of some kind, it needs to move in a certain way that's believable, like animal mechanics and stuff like that. She's a genius. And so she wanted to take everybody to the zoo and show them how she like live draws an animal in motion. And it's hard to do, but she's a professional. So I took everybody to the zoo and then they're feeding the tigers that day or at the time that we're there anyway. They're like they play like roaring sounds and stuff in the enclosure to get them all hyped up about their fresh meat they're about to get, and and so they're just prowling. They're in captivity, but they think they're in the wild right now. They're about to take down a gazelle or something. Whatever tigers do. I don't think gazelles live in the jungle. Man cubs from Jungle Book. And so Molly's like just squatted down, hands length away from this cage, like looking this tiger in the eyes and stuff. I'm like freaking Shere Khan looking at her, and she's just as if nothing could possibly phase her. And I had a picture I took. I was like, this girl's got way bigger balls than I. Like she's made of steel or something. Because I'm not getting that close to a tiger, not even in the cage, because I'm afraid it's just like I, even if I don't think it could physically hurt me, I know it wants to, especially right then and there. I'm like, I know you're angry, and I don't have any ill will towards you, and I know that doesn't mean anything to you either. You're, but maybe I'm just overthinking it.
Yeah, like I said, the tiger that I petted was just a cub. I think that, well, where I did that, there is a pumpkin farm. And so as is my American duty in the fall, you go to the pumpkin farm and pick out a bunch of pumpkins. They also had an exotic zoo from a reserve that's up in Wisconsin, and
Mm.
they are taking care of, they rescue these animals, and then they would bring them down to this place in Illinois and
Sure.
have them on display. And that paid most of the budget for the year of people paying to go into this exotic zoo area. And it was amazing. Like I got to pet a giraffe and deer, and there's an enclosure which has got all of these exotic birds, and you just go in there and you hold your hand out with food and they'll just like land on your hand and eat the food out
Mm.
of your hand. And the giraffes like carrots.
I think giraffes like everything. They'll eat whatever you have in your hand and then wrap their tongue around your wrist 3 times and stuff.
Yes, yes.
Yeah,
It's very weird when
right.
like when you start, but I guess the place sold us, little cut up baby carrots and then
Sure,
we
sure.
eat them. I assume it was one of the healthier choices since the giraffe was literally, or well, all of the giraffes were literally eating all day long because people
Yeah.
wanted to pet them.
Well, they're grazers, you know. I mean, that's what they do in the wild is they just walk around eating leaves out of trees and stuff all day long. And honestly, carrots are probably exotic to them.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
whoa, they're from way down there, man. They don't do that.
This is why I like personal folklore and people sharing their personal, because like we started with coyotes and then, we went to the cheetah and then we got back to like games and
Mhm.
tigers. And so it's just part of what I think about when I think about folkloring is how sharing these stories, like now I've got other stories that you've shared with me that I now know, and I know about how, you got engaged and how the coyotes played a part in that. And that's what I really like people to think about when they think about folklore is, and we talked about this earlier, that it's always developing. We're always telling these stories, and it's good for people to notice that their own folklore exists, and sharing it is what is fun about that.
If you're a writer, you know, if you whether it be books or video game scripts or short story, whatever it is that you're doing, knowing like actually getting out there and engaging with other people and knowing their stories and their experiences makes when you take those things and you make it into your own kind of soup
Hmm. Hmm.
for your story, makes it feel more real.
Yeah.
Like it's really tied into something that actually happened and it's believable and people can relate to that.
Hmm. Hmm.
I mean, I know a lot of authors, myself included, tend to write sort of from a personal experience, even if they're like kind of superimposing themselves onto the character in the world. I mean, one of the games that we're about to publish, hopefully, it's called Stellar Valkyrie, and it's a space opera basically, but you play as this bird named Falco, and you're a bounty hunter, and every monster in the game is some kind of different animal, right? So you have like the first thing you do is you're on a planet that's made to look like Yellowstone Park with geysers and caves and that kind of thing. And you fight this big boss man. His name is Elk Man. Obviously, he's an elk. Then the next place is like a winter planet. And you go and you fight a solar bear who's a polar bear in a hockey outfit, and you fight him in a hockey rink and all that kind of thing. It's very cartoony,
Uh-huh.
but the entire arc of the story is like Falco is kind of chasing this girl
Hmm.
named Cat because she's a cat, which is odd because he's a bird, but don't get me, don't question it. And she's been like brainwashed into joining this like evil cult called the Black Star cult, right? And you're basically doing all these hits so that you can save up enough money to upgrade your spaceship so you can fly to the comet belt so you can save her from the cult that she's joined, right?
Hmm.
And then there's all kinds of stuff that happens along the way. But I think everyone can relate to stories like this. Like most young men have had some situation where it's like, I don't understand why this girl ran off and did all these things, and like I don't and then you're processing that emotionally.
Right.
How do you do that? And I didn't think about any of that when I was writing the story. I just thought, oh, I'll write a cool. Honestly, I was thinking about Indiana Jones and like Han Solo and stuff. I'm like, yeah, that's kind of what I want to do. Space bounty hunter. He's got a cool shirt on, feathery shirt, loose on the neck, all that kind of thing. And then it just grows over time. But talking to people, getting their personal experiences, downloading that into your consciousness, and then like reiterating that on whether that be paper or your computer or a typewriter, whatever it is that you're doing.
Right.
That's what informs our process. And if you're not telling stories that people can relate to, guess what? They're not going to buy it.
Absolutely true. And I think people they're like, oh, write what you know. And again, if it's not relatable, I used to know this guy who he wrote this play about this one person trying to get like his college group of friends to move together into like a communal living situation.
I already don't like this direction of this.
I know. And I told him, I was like,
No,
I don't know that a lot of people are really going to connect with that.
no,
And he was like, no, come on, everybody wants to do that. And I was like, no.
no, you want them to want to do that.
And like it was
No.
literally he wanted his group of like college friends to move into this kind of intentional living environment, right?
Mhm.
And some of them were like, maybe, like when they were younger. But then when they, started having kids and they were like, no, I'm not doing that. He eventually did move to an intentional community with his wife and kids. And then he stayed there a couple of years, decided he didn't like it and left.
Because he wasn't in charge. If he'd have been in charge, he would have liked it.
Yeah, probably. And that was like the character, the main
Mhm.
character trying to get these people to move with him. He was the
Mhm.
one orchestrating everything. So yeah,
Sure.
that's spot on. But yeah, you have to tell stories and that's why we see tropes, right? Because we're seeing, the same kinds of characters because those resonate with people. And that's why stories work because we
Sure.
know what's important to people. It's why we see folklore. When you look at folklore, there's like a ton of folklore about, just as an example, iron, right? Or cauldrons, because that was important to people's survival. It was a game changer for the way that people lived when we were able to start, processing iron and using it. And so there's a lot of folklore around it. And there's a lot of folklore around basic kinds of crops like wheat and corn, because that's what people needed to survive. And so you do see that we tell stories about things that are important to us, right?
Yeah. And your litmus test for a good story is when in the middle of it, people start jumping ahead. They're like, oh, I know what's going to happen. Or they start asking, like I think about the little boy in the Princess Bride. Yeah, where he's like, the grandpa will be telling the story, and then in the middle of it, he'd be like, "Oh my, well, that what happened?" Or this is, and then he gets upset about something that happens, and like that's a good story.
Yeah,
Now you got them hooked. Now they want it. They're moving ahead in their brain. They've got the pattern.
right,
That like, patterns are everywhere, and it's everything.
right.
Period. But you have tropes. You use the word. You have motifs. You have it's like a song, with a chorus and a verse, and like you get people in that rhythm. They start to think, oh, I know what's going to happen, and then they start singing that next chorus when it seems like it's going to come up, but oh, nope, it's a bridge,
Mhm.
and you can hit them with those little twists and turns that make your story fit the mold and yet individual in and of itself. And the best writers do that
Right.
always.
Yeah, and I think, when you start to look at some of those themes or even characters, you'll see different stories for, say, a trickster god, right?
Sure.
So if you say you're going to look at Loki, but then you're going to look at, say, Anansi,
Mm.
and they're both trickster gods, right? But the stories around the spider trickster god are very different than the stories around Loki, but they still have the same. Their arrogance is their downfall. They get in their own way. They do trick people and take advantage of people, but sometimes it bites them in the butt, right? Because that's what a trickster. That's what happens to a trickster. That's what a trickster. That's what should happen.
Mm.
I think that that's why you start to see those similarities because that is what works. We like those stories where the trickster does get in his own way. It's satisfying to us.
I remembered something I wanted to ask you about, and you bringing up Loki reminded me.
Okay.
Okay. So remember we were talking about African folklore, and people don't know a lot about it.
Mhm.
Myths, legends, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So what do you know about the Berber people of like Morocco, Libya, Northern Africa?
Nothing.
So yeah, no one does, right? This is
Uh-huh.
interesting. So I was, I'll try to keep it brief, but I got to tell this whole story.
Okay.
So some people think that that's like roughly where Atlantis might have been. They found some structures and stuff, like all that kind of thing. And so the idea here is that the Berber people of Northern Africa, and I'm talking indigenous, not just like people who live in Morocco now, but like the folks that were there, they had their own mythos. They had, and a lot of their stuff is shared with Egypt and Greece. So they have Atlas in their pantheon, and they have all this stuff. And they have this rain god named Anzar.
Okay.
All right, so recently on In the Keep, I got a hold of this guy named Bruce Solheim, and he's an author, but he's also a historian. Like he teaches history at Citrus College in Seattle.
Okay.
And one of the more interesting things about him is that he has constant communication with this non-human intelligence he calls Anzar the progenitor. And I'm talking, he's in all aspects, a sane man.
Okay.
Like he both goes through life perfectly normal, obviously, doing all that kind of thing. But he's, shared these stories and written these books about like ever since he was a kid. He's just had this, call it imaginary friend, call it an alien, call it Anzar, the progenitor god of the Berber people.
Mhm.
And so I was like, okay, let's see what you have to say. So I started asking him all these questions. I'm like, if you're really this ancient entity, you should be able to tell me what happened to Atlantis. I can't fact check you, so you could say whatever you want. And he's like, yeah, so if you really want to understand the Atlanteans, you need to like understand the Berber people. I'm like, okay, noted. Wikipedia article open, start doing some searches and all that kind of thing. All right, tell me about Jesus, tell me about Buddha, tell me about Muhammad, tell me about all this stuff. And then I'm like, all right, well, I've asked him about all things that you could just say whatever you want. So then I'm like, all right, I'm thinking of another case. This guy named Don Phillips, who's a British fellow who also has a non-human intelligence that he speaks with. He calls her Becky,
Okay.
and he's known in the paranormal world for solving cases. Like he's good. How is within question. There was even an episode of Unsolved Mysteries where Steve Mera, famous parapsychologist, is working with this guy to try to figure it out. And so the thing with Becky is that no one can figure out who the heck Becky was. She tells Don, or he tells us that she tells him that she was a woman, and she died in a plane crash. And that's the gist of the story. But the thing is, none of the investigators can figure out if that woman ever existed.
Oh,
So the question is she a trickster? But then Don is like, well, she's never told me to do anything bad. She just helps me help people. So I don't really care if her story is true. She is who she is. And some people are like, that's a demon. Some people are like, oh, it's an angel. Some people are like, this guy's crazy. Back to Bruce.
uh-huh.
So I'm like, tell me about Don Phillips. And I need to also say he has two people he talks to. One of them is an old friend of his named Gene who passed away, and the other one is Anzar, and they're both part of this conversation.
Okay.
So I'm talking to him, and he's telling me what they're saying in response to my questions, because they're not audibly talking to me, obviously.
Right.
So I'm like, tell me about Don Phillips, and he says Gene says CIA, and I'm like, well, that can't be it. He's British, maybe MI6. I don't know. And he says, well, no, hold on. Anzar thinking something different. I'm like, well, just tell me about Becky. That's what I want to know. What does Anzar think of Becky? And so then it gets really interesting. He's just like, messenger, like kind of like me, I'm like, he has no idea who I'm talking about.
Right.
Like he's not Googling this because he's got his eyes closed, you know. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so crazy. So then I'm like, so tell me about what you think of that is going on there. And so Anzar comes back with like, yeah, like a non-human intelligence like me. Interesting. How did you freaking know that? But I'm still kind of held up on the CIA thing is wrong. We continue with the conversation. Great podcast.
Mhm.
Entertainment or research, or you call it whatever you want. Hopefully it's entertaining to the people who listen.
Sure.
I'm moved by this. So at the end of it, I'm like, why did he say CIA? Where did he get that from? I Google it. Sure enough, there's a freaking CIA story. Their agent was named also, just by coincidence, named Donald H. Phillips. Can't make this up.
That's wild.
And I don't know if this is real or not. I'll never be able to prove it. No one's ever going to believe it, even if I was 100% certain about it.
Mhm.
But that kind of stuff is so fascinating to me
Yep.
that, there are people who appear at least to have these sort of clairvoyance, telepathic abilities. Look at Edgar Casey's story, Blavatsky, all this stuff is endlessly fascinating. And that's human folklore. That's not like, oh, there was a dancing rain god and we went out and did all this stuff. Like it's that's all in the distant past. But I mean, this is like happening around us every day
Yeah.
where there are these people with these wildly interesting stories.
Yep.
And I want to know more about that stuff. Like that's what gets me. That's makes my heart beat.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I have certainly had some wildly accurate readings from people.
Mhm. Sure. Yeah, I did a palm reading recently that was like spot on. I was like, holy cow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, it doesn't matter if it's true or not, it's what do people believe, right?
Hmm.
And so these people who are talking to other entities, and I have a friend who channels regularly, and that level of belief in this is real and the ability to not be like, you know, am I just hearing voices? Like, am I crazy? And because I think a lot of people doubt themselves when they have like if they have flashes of clarity or moments where they just have some sort of knowing in a moment and they discount that. And I love the people who are like, no, this is 100% true, absolutely, another entity. It's not me. It's not my thoughts. It's not anything. And I love that ability to keep this childlike wonder and absolute certainty that it exists. And I certainly have struggled in my life with doubts about stuff like that. I'm very much Mulder, I want to believe.
Hey, I got the poster behind
I just looked up and said,
the
wait.
the thing is with those types of situations, right, where someone like absolutely truly believes it, it's like no one can prove them wrong.
Yeah,
You know, you can, I guess, debunk them or say like you were wrong about this, but like just because they told you something that was wrong doesn't necessarily even mean that they weren't lying to you or that they just didn't know.
right.
You'll never really know. But the belief in it, and I'm going to err on the side of I think folks are at minimum they're tapping into their subconscious on a level that we're just not ready
Right.
for. The rest of us are not really getting. But it's pretty widely accepted in nearly every society in the world, unless you live in like a strictly atheist communist country of some kind, like I don't know, the Soviet Union, perhaps. But even then, they had underground religious movements all the time.
Right.
It's perfectly acceptable for someone to say, like, I have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ.
Hmm.
He speaks to me. I talk to him. What I feel his hand in motion. I took my hands off the wheel the other day, and guess what? I didn't crash because Jesus had the wheel.
Yeah, yeah.
That's fine.
Yep.
And we don't consider that to be crazy.
Right.
I mean, some people do, but overall, we're not going to take that person and lock them up in an insane asylum or put them on drugs or whatever, unless it becomes like problematic. If they're just rash in their behavior, like they have manic depressive episodes or something like that.
Yeah.
But if someone's talking to Anzar, the rain god of the Berber peoples, we start to like side eye them. I'm like, I don't know. The reason is because we don't know that story.
Right.
I know the story of Jesus Christ. I know the stories, of Muhammad, the prophet. I know the stories of Buddha, all the yogis and stuff like that. I can relate to these stories. So I know where you're coming from when you're telling me that story. But if you start telling me about some God I ain't never heard of, well, that explains a whole lot of wars that happened in ancient times.
Right. Well, and I think that it's like
Yeah,
people believe a lot of different things, like a lot of different entities, talking about their guides or the ancestors or the spirits. And, in addition to different gods, different
mm,
goddesses. And so it just depends, I think, like the level of crazy you get labeled with depends on how well known the stories are, right? And
yes,
yeah,
100%. Yeah.
and so I think that it's really interesting. Like I think, and I've spoken to people who are like that is actually the blood of Christ. It is actually the body of Christ. Like it changes spiritually into action. And it's like,
And Catholics do believe this.
oh yeah. And I'm like,
This is canonical in the church. This
oh
happens.
yeah.
They've DNA tested it.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
know. It's
And
like a
yeah,
vampire zombie cult thing going on, right? Like they're drinking blood, they're eating flesh.
sure.
And to me, when I hear that, I'm like, that's metaphorical. But then there are people who are like, no, that's real. And nobody's saying that's some crazy talk right there.
It's like pro wrestling. It's real to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I know John Cena is not really evil, but for that duration of that 3 hour show, he's the worst person in the world. And I hate him and I want him to get beat up.
Yeah, I mean, that's suspending disbelief, which to me is slightly different. And we need that for our stories. When magical
Sure.
things happen in stories, you just accept them at face value and move on.
Mm.
And I, of course, have many opinions on whether or not magic is real and in what form it is real. And it's not waving a wand and having, a big bag of money appear. It's different than that.
But the lore of magic is written by people who don't understand it, so they make things up.
Right,
Right? Like, so this idea that a wizard waves his wand and shoots lightning bolts out of it, it comes from people who are observing the alleged witch or wizard from afar
right,
and making up what they think they do.
right.
It's none of that stuff ever comes from the magician themselves. They never say stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, like when you look at people who actually have a magical practice, right?
Sure.
Going to use their athame or a wand in order to focus and control energy and point,
Yes.
right? And that is in some ways it's metaphorical, right? Because you look at it and sometimes they'll use their finger to point energy or
Right. I'm just saying they're not saying Avada Kedavra and killing you.
but observing that from afar of saying, I'm going to point this wand and have
Mhm.
it have some sort of action, I can see where those stories, where they grow from.
Yeah,
Because we want magical things to be true. We want magic to be real.
it is real.
I know, but we want it to be. So, and again, it's what's the belief system? And we want to find magical things and we want to have our stories have magic infused in them, right?
Telling someone a great story and getting them into that trance
Mhm.
where they're like guessing what's going to happen and they're so excited about it
Yeah.
is magic.
Right.
That we call it movie magic for a reason. And you could call it hypnosis, but you just say hypnosis is demonstration of what magic really is.
Yeah. So, okay. Well, I don't want to take up any more of your time. But
Mhm.
before we go, can you just let people know how they can find you, your games, your podcast? And is that one episode that you were talking about with the guy channeling, is that live yet? Because I'm dying to hear that.
It's not. I can send you the screener for it though. It's already edited and everything, but it should come out. I could tell you, at least for the sake of your listeners, it will be on my feed as of 8 July. That's when it's scheduled
Okay.
for. So, but yeah, all my stuff is on inthekeep.com. That's INTHEKEEP.com. Yeah, all the games are on there, so you can go ahead and wish list. Got Call of Ragnar. It's a fantasy RPG,
Mhm.
low fantasy. Not a whole lot of dragons and stuff in that, but that's gonna hopefully come out one day. I need a big budget, so if you got $1 million you want to throw at me, I would love that. But you can wish list it now on Steam, and you can get the demo on itch.io. Stellar Valkyrie, the one I was talking about, is a space opera cartoon adventure shooter game that will be I am aiming for later this year.
Okay.
I can never make promises with indie games because you never know. Somebody's got to go, oh, well, I got to focus on my day job or whatever. But
Right, right.
ideally, that's coming out later this year. You can wishlist both of those on Steam right now. The first one I talked about, I'll have to announce formally later. And yeah, the podcast is, I'm sure there's an episode for you. If you like folkloring, there, at very minimum, you could listen to Tracy's episode.
Which was a lot of fun to do.
Yeah.
All right,
Yeah.
well, great. Thanks so much for taking the time today, and thank you to my listeners for taking the time to chat with us today.
hmm Keep on doing that magic you're doing out there, folks.
As always, thank you for listening to Folkloring. If you have any questions or comments or would like to suggest a topic for a future episode, please email us at folkloringpod@gmail.com or message us on Blue Sky, Facebook, or Instagram. Other places you can find me are at the Folklore Podcast as the theater, film, and storytellers correspondent, or creating folklore-inspired games at madmenandheroes.com. Stay curious, stay connected, and keep the traditions alive. And I hope that wherever you are, folklore is making your life more magical.